Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we have a new life story. Let's begin.
My name is Elira, and the last time I saw my parents, it was at a party that was supposed to be about love, family, and celebration. Instead, it ended with blood on polished marble and a silence that still rings louder than their voices ever did. Before I take you through what happened, I want you to ask yourself something. What would it take for you to finally say enough to the people who raised you? What would finally snap inside when loyalty is no longer love and family becomes a performance? Because for me, it wasn't the blow to the head or the lies or even the betrayal that hurt the most. It was that I still, somewhere deep inside, wanted them to choose me. And they never did. It was a warm Sunday in early spring, the kind that teases summer with its golden light and jasmine-scented breeze. I pulled into the upscale cul-de-sac where my parents lived, my silver sedan humming quietly as I eased into a parking space at the far end. Every other car gleamed like it had just rolled off a showroom floor. Sleek black Teslas, pristine BMWs, even a vintage Jaguar someone must have brought in just for show. I caught my reflection in the side mirror. Plain dress, hair pinned neatly, no brand names, no sparkle. Just me. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up the small box I'd wrapped the night before, a personalized pen set for my brother Elliot. Gold engraved, elegant, safe. I thought it would be enough. As I approached the house, the air vibrated with the hum of jazz and the clinking of champagne glasses. Someone had strung lights across the porch and garden like it was a wedding reception. Laughter spilled from the open windows, and for a second, I paused, hand tightening on the gift bag, not because I felt out of place, but because I already knew I wasn't really expected. At the door, a young man with a guest list and a perfect smile greeted me. His bow tie was crooked in a way that made it look intentional, like someone had trained him to seem effortlessly stylish. "Name, please?" he asked, pen poised. "Elira Carrington." He flipped through the list, his smile faltering for a second. You're here as a +1 with the Carrington family." I frowned. "That's... I'm their daughter." He looked genuinely flustered, turning the sheet around for me to see. There it was, clear as ink. Elliot, our brother, our parents, our cousins, even their children, all listed by name. At the bottom, smaller font, +1 Gesta family. My name nowhere. I forced a smile. "It's fine. Just give me the badge." He handed it to me hesitantly, and I pinned it to my dress with fingers that didn't quite stop shaking. It read simply, "Guest." Inside, the living room had been turned into something between a gala and a campaign launch. Chandeliers glittered, tables sparkled with crystal and linen. Every surface gleamed with wealth. I found my seat near the back, table 19, tucked next to the kitchen entrance. No one else was there yet. My place card was misspelled. The napkin beside it had been folded into a swan, but it drooped sadly, as if someone had given up halfway. I straightened it out of habit, feeling like a stagehand in someone else's scene. From where I sat, I could just barely see the head table. My brother stood at the center of it all, tall and smiling, surrounded by executives and old friends. Elliot had just been named regional vice president at his firm. This was his celebration. And if the applause was the indication, he was everyone's golden boy. My mother was radiant in emerald silk, greeting guests like a politician's wife. She kept repeating the same phrase, "This is our son Elliot. Yes, regional VP in only 4 years." My father, stone-faced but proud, hovered nearby. Occasionally, his eyes scanned the room, but they never landed on me for more than a second. When they did, it was as if he were acknowledging a waiter, not a daughter. I picked up my water glass and held it tightly. The coldness grounded me. The chatter around me blurred into a polite, exclusive buzz, like a language I used to speak but had forgotten. The air was heavy with performance. I'd been gone too long to be familiar, but not long enough to be a stranger. Just someone they didn't want in the photo. And then the microphone crackled, and a voice announced, "And now, a few words from someone very close to the guest of honor. Please welcome Elliot's little sister, Alira Carrington." My spine straightened on instinct. I blinked. The room shifted. I hadn't written a speech. No one told me I'd be speaking. I looked up, and Elliot gave me a quick nod. My mother clapped, her expression fixed, almost triumphant. My father leaned back in his seat, expectant. I walked slowly toward the stage, heart pounding. A spotlight found me before I even reached the microphone. My heels tapped across the floor, echoing like accusations. I reached the podium and looked for a cue, a card, a note, anything. There was nothing, only the warmth of lights and the cool edge of isolation. Behind me, the screen came alive with a video montage. Childhood photos of Elliot, his soccer trophies, his graduation, his blueprints, clips of my mother narrating how he always had brilliance in his eyes, and my father chiming in about natural leadership. The room watched in reverent silence. I stood on the stage while the reel rolled behind me, erasing my presence from every frame. When the lights came back up, applause followed. I nodded faintly and leaned into the microphone. "It's a beautiful night. And Elliot, you've always..." That's when she did it. My mother stepped forward laughing, interrupting me like it was all part of the plan. "Oh, sweetheart, wouldn't it be just perfect if you handed over the condo keys tonight as a surprise?" There was a pause, then silence. Not polite silence, not anticipation, just confusion, a static emptiness. One or two guests looked around nervously. A glass clinked. Someone whispered. I blinked. "What?" She smiled wider. "The Austin condo. You're always away for work. Elliot and Claire just got married. It makes sense." My father boomed from the table. "Come on, Alira. It's just a formality. That space is too much for one person." It wasn't a question. It was an ambush, and everyone knew it. I looked around. Elliot stared down at his plate. His wife shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. My mouth was dry. "This wasn't agreed on," I said, voice sharp now. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother waved it off like a joke. "Don't be dramatic. It's symbolic, like a gesture." I saw it then. Not confusion or misunderstanding. Calculation. This was planned, timed, orchestrated. They were never going to ask. They were going to present it like a fait accompli and make refusal look like betrayal. I placed the microphone down slowly. The soft thud it made was louder than any protest. I smiled. The kind of smile you give when you realize the game's already been lost and you're the only one who didn't know you were playing. And as I stepped off the stage, the night hadn't even reached its lowest point yet. I didn't return to my table. I walked straight out of the banquet hall, the weight of 100 eyes pressing into my back like cold fingers. The air outside was cooler than I remembered. The jasmine had turned bitter in my nose. I stopped on the edge of the driveway and exhaled slowly, clutching the gift bag like it was the last thing tethering me to the version of myself I'd tried to bring into that room. But I wasn't that version anymore. I was something else now, something scraped raw. I heard footsteps behind me and didn't turn. I knew who it would be, and I was right. "Elira," my brother's voice came softly, like he knew too much. Wait. I kept facing forward, but I let him come closer. I could feel his warmth behind me before he spoke again. They just thought it made sense. You're barely there, and Claire, she's pregnant. So there it was, the real reason. The way they always delivered their manipulations wrapped in bows of convenience and timing. I turned slowly to face him. His tie was slightly askew, like he'd pulled at it in frustration before coming after me. His eyes were tired, but not regretful. And that entitles you to what? To my home? I asked. Because you've created a life that fits their picture better than mine? He looked away, toward the house, like it might rescue him from the weight of the conversation. It's not like that. They don't understand you, Elira. That sentence, more than anything else, made my blood go cold. Not because it was untrue, but because it was the closest thing to honesty any of them had said in years. They didn't understand me, and they didn't want to. They wanted the Elira who stayed silent, who smiled politely, who passed the salt at dinner without asking why she was always sitting at the corner of the table, never the center. You know what hurts the most? I said, stepping closer. It's not that they tried to take it. It's that they did it publicly, without even asking. Like I'm a problem they need to manage, not a person they raised. He opened his mouth to speak, but I shook my head. I wasn't finished. I've given them everything I could. Holidays, respect, distance, even when I didn't agree with their choices. Even when I saw how differently they treated you. And not once, Eli, not once did either of them ask me what I wanted. Not when I turned down the Boston job. Not when I helped pay for Dad's back surgery. Not when I gave up that scholarship to stay close and take care of Mom while she recovered from her stroke. They took and I gave. And now you expect me to give again with a smile on my face? He stepped back. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The whole room did it for you. He looked smaller then. Not in size, but in certainty. Like he finally saw me as something outside the role they'd written for me. A person with edges, with boundaries. He said, I'll talk to them, weakly. No, I'll talk to them, but not today. I turned and walked to my car, the keys already in my hand before I'd reached the door. I didn't cry until I hit the freeway, and even then it wasn't sobbing, just a quiet, leaking grief that spread across my chest like spilled ink. It wasn't just about the condo, or the party, or the public display. It was the realization that I'd been performing a part I hadn't auditioned for my entire life, and no one, not one of them, had ever clapped. The next day, I called my attorney. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted clarity. I needed to know if my name was even on the deed anymore. It wasn't. Apparently, it had been quietly transferred to a family holding account 3 years ago. I had co-signed the property with my parents when I first bought it, something about helping with credit leverage when I was younger. And at some point, they'd reorganized it into the trust, a trust I hadn't seen, hadn't agreed to, hadn't signed. But I'd signed something once, years ago, a blanket authorization form during a refinancing meeting my father insisted I attend. That's standard, he'd said. Just consolidating. Makes tax stuff easier. I was 23. Now I was 34, and the home I'd paid the down payment on, the place I decorated with my own hands, the only space in the world that was truly mine, was no longer mine. I said, they can't just take it, to the attorney. Well, she replied. They already did. What followed was a slow burn of disbelief turning to fury. My parents, when confronted, acted surprised, as if I'd made a mistake, misunderstood, exaggerated. We thought it was still yours, my mother said over the phone. It's in the family, Alira. Family is not an excuse for theft, I said. My father was less subtle. You're blowing this out of proportion. You're not married. You have no children. It's not like you need it. It took everything I had not to scream. Because that was it, wasn't it? That was the truth, beneath all their smiles. I was a placeholder in their lives, a shadow, a backup, someone they could point to when they wanted to show how inclusive, how modern, how loving they were. But when it came time to share, to sacrifice, to treat me as someone whose life had weight, they always chose Elliot. Always. So I did what none of them expected. I filed suit. Quietly, formally, professionally. I didn't threaten. I didn't scream. I didn't post online. I let the law speak. A cease and desist, a property claim, a demand for restitution. And then, for the first time, they called me. Not to apologize, but to beg. You're humiliating us, my mother said. You're ruining your brother's chance at a promotion, my father snapped. But the one that hurt the most came from Elliot. Is this really worth tearing us apart? I wanted to laugh, as if we hadn't already been torn for years, held together only by obligation and fragile social appearances. Yes, I said, because I'm done pretending we were whole to begin with. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within days of filing the suit, I received a letter from their family lawyer. Carefully worded, cautiously polite, and condescending in the way only someone who has been paid too well for too long can manage. They proposed a private reconciliation process, asked me to withdraw my claim in the spirit of preserving familial integrity, and offered to revisit the terms of the trust at a more appropriate time. Every line dripped with the same implication. This was inconvenient, unseemly, embarrassing. For them, not for me. There wasn't a single word of accountability in the entire document, not even a pretense of regret. I forwarded it to my attorney without a word. The next thing to arrive was a series of emails from extended family, some subtle, some direct. An aunt asked if I was doing okay mentally, and if I needed a break from work. A cousin tried to invite me to lunch, just to talk things over, pretending she hadn't posted a photo at the party with a caption about how proud we all are of Elliot and his future. But what really sealed it was the message from my godmother. You're better than this, Illyra. Don't let bitterness harden you. As though standing up for myself was an act of emotional weakness. As though self-respect equaled vindictiveness. I began to realize that in families like mine, silence is currency, and I had stopped paying. So they called it betrayal. What they didn't know, what none of them had even cared to learn, was that I had quietly kept records for years. Not because I'd planned for war, but because something inside me had always known I would have to prove I was telling the truth one day. Copies of receipts, email trails, photos of the renovation invoices I paid out of pocket for that condo. The sofa, the kitchen counters, the hardwood floors I chose and paid for, the moving truck I hired, the energy bills under my name, the therapist notes from when I first began talking about how my family had a habit of erasing me in rooms they swore they built for me. And when I finally showed them to the mediator, when I laid out the full chain of how that home had gone from mine to theirs under the guise of love and tax efficiency, she looked at me with something bordering on heartbreak. "You were never meant to know," she said softly, more to herself than to me. "No, I was never meant to ask." The case didn't go to court. They settled quickly after my attorney sent a notice of intent to depose my father. The thought of testifying under oath must have spooked him. Or maybe it was the idea of the press getting wind of a respected family man funneling his daughter's property into a trust without her full knowledge. Either way, the settlement came through, silent, large, and with an ironclad NDA they begged me to sign. I didn't. I let them offer it, then I returned it with my own terms. Full transfer of the condo deed back into my name, public withdrawal of Elliot's interest in the property, and a notarized statement from their lawyer acknowledging that I had not forfeited ownership and had been misled. They resisted, of course they did, but in the end, they agreed. Because power in their world was image, and mine had finally become a threat to theirs. After the papers were signed, I went back to the condo for the first time in months. The keys felt unfamiliar in my palm, like holding a version of myself I'd almost let them take. Inside, nothing had changed. My books were still stacked in the reading nook. My favorite mug still sat on the kitchen shelf. But the air had shifted. It felt lighter now. Not because they were gone, but because I was finally present. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the windows, the door frames, not to check for damage, but to remind myself that this space was real, that I had built it, that no signature, no silence, no manipulation could take that away again. Later that night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine and opened my journal. I hadn't written in weeks. The page stared up at me, blank but expectant. I wrote one sentence. They tried to write me out. I rewrote the ending. Weeks passed. No one from the family contacted me again. I didn't expect them to. I think they finally realized I wasn't going to come back into the fold quietly, that I wasn't going to be their shadow, their placeholder, their scapegoat for what it meant to have a daughter who didn't fit their blueprint. And I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. I wasn't burning with resentment or drowning in grief. I was just done. And in that space, something new grew. A kind of calm I hadn't known before. A steadiness. Like I could finally hear my own voice without it being drowned by theirs. I didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. I just needed to live. I stopped talking about them. Not in a bitter, dramatic way, just with the kind of quiet finality you reserve for people who no longer define your life. I didn't tell coworkers about the lawsuit. I didn't update acquaintances on the outcome. When someone brought up Elliot in passing, his latest promotion, his wife's pregnancy, I nodded, offered a polite smile, and changed the subject. It wasn't denial, it was discipline. A kind of emotional boundary that had taken me decades to develop. I wasn't trying to rewrite history, I was choosing not to let it rewrite me. And something strange happened when I stepped back from that identity. Daughter, sister, family member, emotional keeper of balance. I started becoming a person again. Not a role, not a reaction, just a Lyra. The version of me that had been buried under years of forced obedience and performative belonging. I went back to things I had once loved and left behind. I started painting again, poorly at first, then with more color. I bought new clothes, not the subdued ones that wouldn't draw criticism, but the ones I actually liked, even if they were loud or strange or wrong for my body type, whatever that meant. I reconnected with people who had only known me on the periphery, and for the first time, let them in. It was around that time I received a message from an old college friend, Jasmine. We hadn't spoken in years, not since a falling out triggered by my habit of disappearing emotionally when things got too intense. She wrote, "I don't know what's changed in you, but you look lighter, happier, whole. I'm proud of you." I stared at that message for a long time before replying, and when I did, I was honest. I told her about the lawsuit, about the betrayal, about the strange, painful freedom that comes when you finally realize you were never loved unconditionally, but survive anyway. We met for coffee that week and didn't stop talking for 4 hours. I didn't know it at the time, but it was the beginning of something else too, a community. Not a family in the traditional sense, but something far more honest. People who chose each other, not because they were bound by blood, but because they saw something worth protecting. Months later, I was invited to speak at a local nonprofit event focused on financial empowerment for women. A friend of a friend had heard about my case and thought I could offer a meaningful perspective. At first, I said no. I didn't want to become a spokesperson for family betrayal. I didn't want my story to become performance again. But after some reflection, I agreed. Because the story wasn't just mine. It was bigger now. It belonged to anyone who had ever been gaslit by people they trusted. Anyone who had ever been told their intuition was wrong. Anyone who had signed something they didn't understand because someone they loved asked them to. Anyone who had walked away with nothing but their own name and somehow made it enough. The room was small, maybe 20 women, some older, some barely out of college. I told them the story plainly, without theatrics. I told them how silence can become a habit, how guilt is often used as currency in families, and how betrayal doesn't always come with slamming doors. Sometimes it comes with polite language and well-dressed smiles. And when I finished, no one clapped. Instead, a woman in the front row stood up and said, "Thank you for not making it sound clean. It never is." But I needed to hear that surviving it was possible. That was enough. Back home that night, I stood in the middle of my living room and realized something. I no longer felt like a visitor in my own space. The condo, once a battleground, had become sacred again. Not because of the bricks or the furniture, but because it represented the moment I stopped giving myself away in pieces. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened the balcony doors. The city buzzed quietly below, indifferent and alive. I breathed it in, not in triumph, but in peace. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly, irrevocably free. Not from them, from needing them. And that, I realized, was the real inheritance they never wanted me to claim. The letter came on a Monday. Cream-colored envelope. No return address. The handwriting was familiar, precise, the kind that came from years of disciplined note-taking and private school cursive drills. Inside was a single sheet of thick linen paper. My father's voice stared back at me in typewritten lines, each one more carefully constructed than the last. "Alira, I understand that what's happened cannot be undone. I won't pretend to apologize in a way that changes anything. You've made it clear that you're not the same girl we once thought we were raising. And perhaps we were never raising you at all, just trying to mold something that couldn't be bent without breaking. Still, I want you to know that there are things we didn't say. Not out of malice, out of habit, out of fear. Your mother says I should write this to clear my conscience. I don't know if that's what I'm doing. Maybe I just want you to understand that some of what we did was out of love. Twisted, maybe, but love. You were always too independent, too sharp. It scared us. Be well, Dad." I sat with the letter for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because, strangely, it didn't. It felt too late. Not even in the timeline sense, though yes, it was years too late, but emotionally, too removed. Like hearing a stranger recall your trauma in the past tense, gently, academically. I folded the paper once, then again, and tucked it into the back of a journal I no longer wrote in. Not out of pettiness, just closure. There would be no reply. Spring turned to summer. I took time off from work, traveled for the first time in years without planning my movements around family events. I visited coastal towns where no one knew my name. I painted cliffs and markets and sea foam. I read novels in the sun without checking my phone. I walked through antique shops and smiled at strangers and let silence accompany me like an old friend, no longer something I needed to fill. One night, in a quiet seaside town, I sat at a dock and watched the moon rise. The air was salted and soft. A couple nearby laughed quietly over a shared bottle of wine. Somewhere far off, someone played a violin through an open window. And in that moment, I felt something settle in me. Not triumph, not resolution, just an understanding that I didn't need their apology because I had given one to myself. It came slowly, this forgiveness. Not for them, for me. For all the times I swallowed my voice, for the years I believed I was hard to love, for the way I had let their version of me dictate my reflection. I forgave myself for not leaving sooner, for still hoping they'd choose me, even after all the evidence to the contrary. I forgave myself for becoming quiet just to stay invited. For every holiday dinner I sat through like a ghost in a dress someone else picked. And once I forgave myself, something miraculous happened. I stopped needing revenge. That fall, I hosted a dinner at my condo. 10 people. Friends. Colleagues. A neighbor I barely knew who had helped me carry groceries once. We cooked together, laughed until wine spilled, ate on mismatched plates I'd thrifted with no theme. At one point, someone put on music and we danced barefoot in the living room, badly, joyfully. I stood in the middle of it all and realized this was family. Not the kind you're born into, the kind you build. Slowly, tenderly, with people who never once ask you to shrink. Someone toasted. To Illyra, who gives us space and fills the room without taking it over. I laughed, I cried a little, but mostly I just breathed. Because I was finally living a life that didn't need to be justified, explained, or defended. Just lived. Years from now, maybe someone will ask me about them, about the house I grew up in, about the brother who got everything, about the parents who wanted a daughter they could display, not one who could think. And I'll say this: they taught me how to survive. Then they taught me how to leave. The rest, I taught myself.